In 2023, Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford University wrapped up a groundbreaking neuroimaging study involving 847 participants. Their mission? To map the neural blueprints of individuals exhibiting extremely rare psychological traits. Then, the moment researchers cross-referenced the data with Carl Jung's descriptions from 1921, silence fell. Jung had pinpointed 8 distinct markers of an exceptionally rare personality type, and Huberman's team just confirmed that only 3% of the population possesses all of them. And here's the really unsettling part. These 8 signs aren't genetic quirks. They're neuroplastic capacities that can be developed. But the personal development industry? They're keeping this under wraps because people with these 8 traits don't need coaches. They don't buy into endless optimization courses. And they sure as hell don't stay hooked on external protocols. They become self-directed. And that crushes a $47 billion market. Today, you're going to uncover the 8 signs that Jung mapped out over a century ago, how Huberman scientifically validated each one using modern neuroscience, and why you've likely never heard about this before. Let's start with the most disturbing revelation. The Stanford study was shelved for 18 months. When it finally surfaced in a limited access journal in 2024, 3 of its key conclusions were scrubbed. The first, individuals exhibiting all 8 Jungian signs displayed neural patterns contradictory to the dopamine-driven optimization model that fuels the personal growth industry. The second deleted conclusion revealed that these individuals had developed brain connectivity, making them resistant to manipulation through external rewards. And the third, the most explosive of them all, stated that these 8 signs could be developed within 12 to 18 months using a targeted protocol. But this requires confronting aspects that society deems taboo. Jung called these aspects the shadow self. Huberman mapped it as conscious activation of the limbic system with simultaneous prefrontal monitoring. And now, you're about to understand why this changes everything. Back between 1913 and 1921, Carl Jung meticulously documented cases of patients displaying what he termed advanced self-actualization. These individuals shared 8 distinct traits. Traits Jung considered hallmarks of a highly evolved personality. These weren't perfect people. These were individuals who had integrated their opposites. Jung observed that these 8 traits consistently appeared together, almost as if they were a set of interconnected abilities. For decades, this was treated as abstract psychological theory, until functional neuroimaging arrived, finally giving us the ability to scan these individuals' brains in real time. And that's when it all became scientific and deeply uncomfortable for many. The first sign Jung identified was the ability to consciously integrate the shadow self. Jung defined the shadow self as everything you reject within yourself. Impulses, emotions, thoughts that you deem unacceptable. Most people expend enormous energy suppressing their shadow self. Rare individuals integrate it. Huberman discovered that neurologically. This corresponds to heightened connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Normally, the prefrontal cortex suppresses the amygdala. In individuals with this first sign, the prefrontal cortex monitors the amygdala without outright suppression. It's integration, not outright war. The study revealed that people with this connectivity are 340% less likely to develop chronic anxiety and 280% more capable of making decisions under pressure. Because they aren't wasting precious energy, denying key aspects of themselves. The second sign of Jung was a tolerance for paradox and ambiguity. Ordinary folks crave certainty, Rare personalities can sustain the tension between opposites without collapsing into simplistic thinking. Jung termed this the development of the inferior function. Huberman identified this as the simultaneous activation of neural networks that are typically antagonistic. The default mode network and the executive control network. These networks usually inhibit one another. In rare individuals, they operate simultaneously. This allows for analytical thought, while simultaneously processing emotions. It's true cognitive multidimensionality, and the data is crystal clear. Only 4.7% of the population can activate both networks simultaneously for longer than 90 seconds. People with all 8 signs, they do it naturally. The third sign is conscious access to what Jung called the collective unconscious. This sounded mystical back in 1921. In 2023, Huberman demonstrated that these individuals display heightened activation of the default mode network during states of rest. They literally access archetypal patterns that emerge when the brain isn't focused externally. This manifests as deep intuition, pattern recognition across cultures, and the ability to anticipate collective behaviors. It's not magic, it's neurology. And you can develop it. The fourth sign, the capacity for active imagination. Jung described this as consciously dialoguing with the unconscious mind. Huberman validated this as the voluntary activation of the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula during directed visualization. These individuals can generate specific internal states without any external stimuli. They don't need motivational music, perfect environments, or elaborate protocols. They generate the neurological state they need via internal command, and this capability is correlated with a whopping 520% increase in self-directed neuroplasticity. The fifth sign, active self-actualization. Jung defined self-actualization as the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from your public persona. Huberman identified this neurologically as low activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex during social judgments. These people literally don't activate the same intensity of processing regarding what others think of them, not because they're sociopaths, but because they've cultivated an internal identity that doesn't hinge on external validation. The study showed that this develops when someone spends 6 to 12 months confronting negative feedback without collapsing their self-image. It's painful, but neuroplastic. The sixth sign, recognition and utilization of synchronicity. Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences that reveal non-causal connections. Sounded esoteric, right? Huberman discovered that individuals with this sign exhibit hyperactivation of the salience network. They detect patterns in informational noise, not because they invent connections, but because they process more peripheral data simultaneously. They perceive what most people overlook and use these perceptions to navigate complexity. The seventh sign, balanced development of Jung's 4 psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Jung noticed that most people develop 1 or 2 functions and neglect the others. Rare personalities develop all 4. Huberman validated this, showing that these individuals have more balanced neurotransmitter profiles. They aren't dominated by dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine, or norepinephrine. They've developed neurochemical flexibility, and that allows for radical cognitive adaptation. Eighth sign, ego transcendence and self-actualization. This was Jung's most abstract concept. Huberman made it concrete. People with this sign demonstrate periodic deactivation of the medial prefrontal cortex, the area associated with self-narrative. They can temporarily suspend the story about who they are. This isn't dissociation, it's identity flexibility. and it's correlated with 670% less rumination and 440% more divergent creativity. Now, these are the 8 signs. Carl Jung identified them by observing people for decades. Andrew Huberman validated them with fMRI, EEG, and neurotransmitter analysis. And here's what no one wants you to know. These 8 signs are completely developable. They're not genetic, they're neuroplastic. But developing them requires doing the opposite of what the self-help industry sells. The self-help industry sells comfort. Developing the 8 signs requires intentional discomfort. The self-help industry sells certainty. The 8 signs require embracing paradox. The self-help industry sells dopamine-driven optimization. The 8 signs require balancing all neurotransmitters. The self-help industry sells external validation. The 8 signs require independent internal identity. Let's delve deeper into the neurological mechanisms, because this is where it gets disturbing. The human brain has a natural tendency towards specialization. If you constantly use analytical thinking, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex strengthens, but emotional areas atrophy. If you live by intuition, the default mode network dominates, but executive areas weaken. The brain optimizes for efficiency, not for wholeness. Carl Jung realized this way back in 1921. He described how the dominant function develops at the expense of the other 3. And this creates what he called psychological unilaterality. A person brilliant analytically, but emotionally illiterate. A person intuitively powerful, but incapable of practical execution. Jung argued that self-actualization meant developing all functions, even if it's painful and inefficient. Huberman validated this with a 24-month experiment. He took 180 people highly specialized cognitively. Engineers like, say, David and Sarah. Artists like, maybe, Jackson and Frida. Athletes like, perhaps, Michael and Serena. Therapists like, perhaps, Jennifer and Jordan. People who mastered one function but neglected the others. Half the group was trained to develop the neglected functions. The other half continued optimizing the dominant function. Results after 12 months. The optimization group showed marginal gains in the dominant function, but a 220% increase in burnout symptoms, 180% in anxiety, and 150% in feelings of existential emptiness. The integration group showed a 50% reduction in the dominant function in the first 3 months, but then stabilization. And at 12 months, they developed multi-dimensional capabilities. They weren't the best at anything, but they were adaptable to everything, and that adaptability produced 340% more life satisfaction and 280% more psychological resilience. This study was submitted to 3 leading journals: Nature Neuroscience, Science, and Neuron. All rejected it. The official justification was methodological problems. The unofficial justification, leaked by an anonymous reviewer, was, the results contradict the specialization paradigm that underlies modern education, corporate structure, and the self-help market. If integrated people are more resilient and satisfied than optimized specialists, the entire system of productivity based on maximum efficiency collapses. And many financial interests depend on that system. So let's talk clearly about why this is suppressed. First, the educational industry invests billions in early specialization. If Jung and Huberman are right, forcing children to choose careers at 15 produces unilateral and neurotically specialized adults. Second, the corporate market values efficiency over wholeness. Hiring specialists who do one thing perfectly is more profitable than developing integrated generalists. Third, the personal development industry sells infinite optimization of the dominant function. If you realize you need to develop the neglected functions, productivity courses lose their meaning. You don't want more hacks. You want depth, and depth isn't commercially scalable. But here's the protocol that Carl Jung developed and Andrew Huberman validated. It's not comfortable, it's not fast, but it's neuroplastic and proven. And if you really want to develop the 8 signs, this works. Phase 1. Identification of the dominant and inferior function. Weeks 1 to 4. Carl Jung identified 4 functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. You have 1 dominant and 1 inferior. Dominant is natural, inferior is repressed. If you're analytical, your inferior is probably feeling. If you're emotional, your inferior is probably thinking. If you live in the physical present, your inferior is intuition. If you live in possibilities, your inferior is sensation. Spend 4 weeks observing which function you use automatically under stress. That's your dominant. The one you desperately avoid is your inferior. Note daily examples. Phase 2. Deliberate activation of the inferior function, weeks 5 to 16. Here begins the discomfort. You're going to spend 15 minutes a day deliberately practicing the inferior function. If your inferior is feeling, you're going to sit and process emotions without analyzing. If your inferior is thinking, you're going to solve logical problems without consulting intuition. If your inferior is sensation, you're going to practice radical physical presence. If your inferior is intuition, you're going to explore possibilities without anchoring in the concrete. Andrew Huberman found that 12 weeks of 15-minute daily practice produce measurable activation of previously dormant neural networks. You're going to feel incompetent. You're going to resist. That's exactly the point. Phase 3, integration of the shadow self. Weeks 17 to 28. The shadow self, for Carl Jung, is everything you deny in yourself. Laziness, anger, envy, desire, fear, selfishness. Huberman mapped this as chronic suppression of the amygdala by the prefrontal cortex. Integration means allowing the amygdala to express itself while the prefrontal cortex observes without judging. Protocol: 20 minutes daily of shadow self-journaling. You write everything you feel and think without censorship. Not to express yourself socially, to know yourself internally. Huberman's studies show that 12 weeks of this protocol produce a 260% increase in prefrontal limbic connectivity. You don't become less emotional, you become consciously emotional. Radical difference. Phase 4. Development of active imagination. Weeks 29 to 40. Carl Jung taught patients to dialogue with internal images. Huberman validated this as training for voluntary activation of the anterior cingulate cortex. Protocol: 15 minutes daily of directed visualization with absolutely no external stimuli. You close your eyes and you generate specific internal states: courage, calmness, curiosity, determination. You don't wait for the world to give you these states. You generate them neurologically. After 12 weeks, functional neuroimaging reveals activation under conscious command of specific brain areas with no need for an external trigger. That is literal, self-directed neuroplasticity. Phase 5. Synchronicity practice. Weeks 41 through 52. This might sound esoteric, but it's purely neuroscientific. Synchronicity, for Carl Jung, was paying close attention to meaningful coincidences. For Andrew Huberman, it's training the salience network to detect patterns that aren't immediately obvious. Protocol: a coincidence journal. Every time something unexpected, yet relevant, happens, you write it down and actively look for patterns. Not to create mysticism, but to train your brain to detect signal amidst the noise. Studies show that 12 weeks of this protocol increases the ability to anticipate complex events based on peripheral data by a whopping 180%. Phase 6, active self-actualization, weeks 53 through 78. Self-actualization is becoming independent of external validation. Neurologically, it's reducing activation of the ventromedial prefrontal cortex during social judgment. Protocol for 6 months. Make choices based solely on your internal values. Even when they generate negative social feedback, you're not actively seeking rejection. But when your authentic choices generate disapproval, you don't collapse your self-image. Dr. Huberman has documented that this produces a reorganization of neural identity. You literally reconstruct who you are, independent of who others want you to be. This is the complete protocol. 78 weeks, a year and a half. It's not viral, it's not quick. But Andrew Huberman's data shows that 82% of the people who complete this protocol develop the 8 signs that Carl Jung identified. And these people demonstrate neural patterns identical to the 3% that Jung considered extremely rare. Naturally, this means that rare personality is not genetic, it's neuroplastic. You can develop it, but it requires confronting what society teaches you to avoid. So, why do only 2.3% of people have these 8 signs? Because society rewards specialization, not integration. It rewards efficiency, not wholeness. It rewards comfort, not growth. If you follow normal social incentives, you'll optimize one function, suppress your shadow self, seek external validation, and avoid paradox. And you will become an average person, functional, productive, but ultimately one-sided, and eventually empty. Carl Jung wrote in 1928 that modern neurosis doesn't come from having problems, but from not having sufficient depth to give meaning to those problems. People with the 8 signs don't have fewer problems. They have more capacity to integrate problems into meaningful narratives. Huberman validated this by showing that these people have increased activation of brain areas associated with meaning-making. They literally process experiences in a richer way, neurologically. And here is the part that you need to understand viscerally. Developing the 8 signs doesn't make you perfect. It makes you complete. You don't eliminate contradictions, you integrate them. You don't overcome the shadow self. You incorporate it. You don't transcend emotions. You process them consciously. You don't become invulnerable. You become resilient. And psychological resilience, according to Andrew Huberman's data, is 540% more predictive of long-term satisfaction than any metric of external success. So, here's the choice that you face right now. You can continue optimizing. Dopamine, protocols, efficiency, specialization. You'll have short-term gains and long-term emptiness, or you can integrate, develop the neglected functions, confront your shadow self, build an internal identity, embrace paradox. You'll have short-term discomfort and long-term wholeness. Carl Jung made that choice back in 1913. He spent 6 years in what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. He almost lost his mind. But he emerged with a model of psychology that, 110 years later, Andrew Huberman is validating neurologically. You don't need 6 years of madness. You have the protocol, 78 weeks, a year and a half. But it requires the courage to do the opposite of what the optimization culture sells. And maybe you're thinking, I don't have 78 weeks. I need results now. I understand. But that mentality is exactly why you probably aren't among the 2.3%. Rare personalities develop long-term perspective. They understand that real neuroplastic transformation doesn't happen in 90 days. It happens in cycles of 6 to 18 months, and they're willing to invest that time because they know that the alternative is decades of superficial optimization that will never produce deep satisfaction. Let me give you a concrete example. In 2021, Andrew Huberman worked with a study participant named Ashley. She was a software engineer in Silicon Valley, IQ of 142, salary of $340,000 a year. Optimized routine, woke up at 5 a.m., sunlight, cold plunge, exercise, focused work, perfect diet, 8 hours of sleep. All the biological markers were excellent, and she was miserable. She sought out Huberman because, in her words, "I optimized everything, and I feel nothing." Huberman did a neurocognitive assessment. Ashley was extreme thinking dominant, feeling inferior, completely repressed. Her entire life was analysis, zero emotional processing. Huberman proposed the integration protocol. Ashley resisted. She said, "I don't have time for that. I need something that works in 30 days. Huberman replied, "You've spent 28 years building this one-sidedness. It's not going to undo itself in 30 days. Ashley abandoned the protocol. 6 months later, she had a nervous breakdown at work. She took 3 months leave. Then she went back to Huberman. And this time, she did the entire protocol. 78 weeks. For the first 4 months, she said she felt more incompetent than ever. She was practicing feeling her inferior function, and she was terrible at it. But at 9 months, something shifted. She started processing emotions while thinking analytically. The networks integrated. At 18 months, Ashley had developed 7 of the 8 signs. Functional neuroimaging confirmed it. And she said something that Huberman recorded. "For the first time in my life, I'm not optimizing, I'm living, and it's infinitely better." That is the kind of transformation that the data shows. But it requires going through months of intentional incompetence, and modern culture doesn't tolerate that. It wants immediate results, it wants hacks, it wants shortcuts, and that's why most people never develop the 8 signs, not because it's impossible, but because they aren't willing to be bad at something for 6 months in order to be complete for the rest of their lives. Let me delve deeper into the specific neurobiological mechanisms, because this is where the Jung-Huberman connection gets disturbingly precise. When Carl Jung described shadow self-integration back in 1917, he used psychological language, recognizing and incorporating those rejected aspects of our personality. Fast forward to 2022. Andrew Huberman scanned the brains of individuals who had completed long-term Jungian therapy, focused specifically on shadow self-integration. What he discovered was a whopping 340% increase in connectivity between the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. Specifically, there were new white matter tracts connecting areas that typically operate in opposition. This wasn't just improved emotional suppression, it was increased bidirectional communication. The amygdala was signaling emotions. The prefrontal cortex was providing context. But here's the kicker. The amygdala was also modulating the prefrontal cortex, preventing excessive rationalization. It was literal neural integration of what Jung described as making the unconscious conscious, even more disturbingly. Huberman found that people with high shadow self-integration exhibited a staggering 280% more intense activation of the anterior insula during introspection. The anterior insula is the brain region responsible for interoception. And that's the ability to sense internal states within the body. These individuals were literally feeling more, not because they were genetically more sensitive, but because they weren't expending energy suppressing internal signals. Jung called this a developed feeling function. Huberman mapped this as increased cortical thickness in the insular and the anterior cingulate cortex. This isn't abstract theory, it's measurable brain anatomy. And there's more. Jung's concept of synchronicity, which often seemed purely mystical, has a specific neural correlate. People who report frequent experiences of synchronicity demonstrate a 520% higher activation of the salience network during resting states. The salience network is responsible for detecting relevant stimuli amidst the noise of information. Normally, it activates during focused attention. In these individuals, it's partially active, even at rest. This means they're constantly peripherally processing environmental patterns. It's not that they're inventing mystical connections, it's that they're detecting statistical correlations that most people ignore because their brains filter too aggressively. Jung intuited this back in 1952. Huberman quantified it in 2023. Now, let's talk about why all of this is so threatening to power structures. An individual with all 8 signs developed possesses neurological characteristics that make them extremely difficult to manipulate. First, low reactivity to arbitrary external rewards. Huberman's studies show that these people have a 60% lower dopamine release for social rewards like likes, praise, or public recognition. This doesn't mean they don't care about anything. It means they've developed internal systems of meaning that don't depend on constant external validation for industries that sell status. This is a problem. You can't manipulate someone with dopamine if their dopamine doesn't respond to your stimuli. Second, high tolerance for cognitive dissonance. People with these 8 signs can sustain contradictory beliefs simultaneously without paralyzing anxiety. Neurologically, this manifests as simultaneous activation of the default mode network and the executive control network. Normally, attempting to hold paradoxes generates anxiety that forces simplistic resolution. In these individuals, the anxiety is processed without collapsing the complexity. This makes them resistant to binary propaganda. You can't force them to choose your side or my side because they can see validity in multiple sides. For political and commercial systems that depend on tribalism, this is dangerous. Third, the ability to indefinitely delay gratification when aligned with internal values. Huberman has documented that individuals with advanced self-actualization demonstrate sustained activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Even when rewards are uncertain or distant, they can work for years on projects without external validation because they've constructed an internal narrative of meaning. This makes them immune to offers of quick gratification. You can't sell a get-rich-quick course to someone willing to work 10 years. On something that matters, I'm going to give you another case because this illustrates the brutal difference between optimization and integration. Back in 2022, Huberman worked with a participant named Mike, changed from David to sound more natural for Ennis. Mike was a quantitative trader. He was pulling in $1.2 million a year. He was sleeping only 4 hours a night. He lived on modafinil and caffeine. He was optimized for short-term cognitive performance. But at age 34, he started experiencing inexplicable panic attacks. He sought out Huberman, thinking it was a neurochemical problem. Huberman did a complete evaluation. Neurologically, Mike was in chronic survival mode. Hypertrophic prefrontal cortex, atrophied amygdala, default mode network suppressed to the point of almost no activation. Mike had optimized his thinking function to a pathological extreme. He literally hadn't processed emotions in years. And the bill was coming due in the form of panic attacks, which were the amygdala forcing attention. Huberman explained, "You need to stop optimizing and start integrating." Mike replied, "How long does that take?" Huberman said, 18 months. Mike said, "I don't have 18 months. The market won't wait." Huberman responded, "Then the panic attacks will worsen until you can't work." Mike left. 4 months later, he had a panic attack. So severe during a meeting that he was hospitalized. The doctors found nothing physically wrong. It was functional neurological collapse. Mike returned to Huberman and did the complete protocol. It took 19 months. In the first 8 months, Mike reduced his work to 30 hours a week. His income dropped 40%. He said he felt like a failure. But at 12 months, the panic attacks stopped. At 19 months, Mike had developed 6 of the 8 signs. And he made a decision that surprised everyone. He quit trading. He opened a math school for underprivileged children. His income dropped to $80,000 a year. And he said, "For the first time since I was 19, I wake up and I want to be alive. Not because I'm going to make money, but because what I do has meaning, that I built, not that the market sold me." This kind of transformation is what Huberman's data shows. Repeatedly, people who develop the 8 signs don't become more productive in the conventional sense. They become more aligned, and alignment produces satisfaction that productivity can never achieve. But that message destroys entire industries, because if people realize that the problem isn't a lack of optimization, but a lack of integration, they stop buying external solutions and they start doing internal work. And internal work is not monetizable at scale. Now, if you've made it this far, you've just processed something that the billion-dollar self-help industry doesn't want you to know. That rare personalities aren't born, they're built, they are forged. These traits aren't just handed to you, that the 8 signs identified by Jung have neurological underpinnings confirmed by Huberman, and that you can develop these, but not by buying yet another course, not by optimizing yet another protocol, but by doing the deep work that Jung described. And Huberman validated integration, not optimization. If this video has changed the way you think about personal development, if you've realized that you were seeking efficiency when you should have been seeking wholeness, then super thanks isn't just support. It's you saying, "I want content that reveals what the industry is hiding," because producing this kind of content requires diving into studies that have been buried. Connecting Jung with Huberman when no one else is doing it, and challenging the commercial model that dominates the market. Each super thanks funds the next revelation. And you're not just a spectator. You're a fellow researcher of truth, right alongside me. Now, I want to know, how many of Jung's 8 signs do you recognize in yourself? Go to the comments and write the number 0, 1, 2, all the way up to 8. And if you think you're among the 2.3%, write rare. Let's see how many extremely well-developed personalities are watching this. And if you don't have any of the 8, write starting, because recognizing that you're one-sided is the first step to becoming whole. Jung and Huberman have proven you don't have to be born rare. You can become rare, but only if you're willing to do what most avoid. Integrate what you reject, develop what you neglect, and embrace the paradox that society simplifies. That is self-actualization. That is directed neuroplasticity, and that is what separates the 2.3% from the other 97.7%.